Welcome to the Giving Town podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Roberts, and my goal is to share stories of hope and generosity in our wonderful community of Newburgh and the surrounding area. This podcast is sponsored by my real estate team, the Joyful Roberts Group. We're licensed real estate brokers with Premier Property Group. If you are considering making a move or selling your home within the next year, reach out to me and I'll be more than happy to walk you through the process of selling your home. In today's episode, I'm interviewing Ron Mock with the Civility Project. We'll be discussing the idea that disagreement is a gift, the 3 levels of civility, the goal of this project, along with several other powerful concepts. So here's my conversation with Ron, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Thank you, Ron, for joining me today, and I'm excited to talk about the Civility Project. We've met some in the past and have talked about this a bit, but I'm looking forward to people who aren't yet familiar about the Civility Project learning about it today.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this.
Yeah. So real quick, before we get into the Civility Project itself, what is your background and how did that lead you to do what you're doing now?
Well, I was an undergraduate at George Fox back in the 1970s. And at that point, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but I had a professor tell me I should go to law school, which I eventually did. It wasn't the first thing I did, but I did go to law school at the University of Michigan. And while I was there, I encountered a group called the Christian Legal Society, which was promoting mediation as an alternative for believers if they had legal disputes, so they wouldn't have to go to court and could settle it amongst themselves. And right after I graduated, I went to a conference on that, and I got involved with the Christian Conciliation Service as a sort of an interested volunteer. Eventually, I helped set up as a Christian Conciliation Service in Detroit. And practiced part-time and ran that for part-time. As a practice lawyer, the part-time after I graduated and ran that part-time. So then I moved back to Oregon and I joined the staff at George Fox. They had started a Center for Peace Learning and they asked me to come and do some things about interpersonal conflict and mediation as part of the Center for Peace Learning. So I got on the staff there in 1985, began to accumulate classes, started teaching about community mediation, helped the Yamhill County Mediation Service, that is called Your Community Mediators now, helped them get started and did their trainings for the first 20 years or so of their organization so that I would train their mediators. And so mediation training, mediation practice, being involved in the Peace Center, teaching politics at George Fox, those are all the little pieces that came together. To help me be ready, I think, to do this kind of work.
Yeah. So what about mediation to you stuck out as something that you thought, hey, this is something I actually want to do, spend some of my life doing this?
Well, when I was my first year out of law school, first of all, I was interested in it as sort of a theological project.
Okay.
That believers shouldn't be suing each other. There are other ways for them to resolve their conflicts, hopefully. And the mechanism was unclear to me, but they were trying to set up one for the Christian mediation program. My first year out of law school, I worked for the Court of Appeals of Michigan as a pre-hearing attorney, which means when they filed appeals, they would come up to our office and I would go through the files of the appeal cases and write a memo introducing the court case to the judges of the Court of Appeals. One of the cases was 3 sisters who had been fighting for at least 5 years in court over their father's estate. And I read through that file, and it was very troubling to me what had happened to them. Their whole relationships had fallen apart because they couldn't agree on how to divide their father's estate. And that seemed to me to be a tragedy that shouldn't happen, doesn't need to happen, and that other ways might be possible. And that's when I really began to get serious about whether it would be possible to start a Christian Conciliation Service in Detroit, Michigan, where I was living at the time. And we got together a group of people and we all agreed that was something to be done. So within that first year, we got one up off the ground and I became the first director of that program. So that's how that was really the single event that catalyzed it for me to become more of a healer than a divider in terms of my legal work.
Yeah. So, which is interesting because and I don't know enough attorneys to be able to, and I don't want to make any kind of blanket statement,
sure.
but to have a heart for less lawsuits instead of more, or instead of trying to win one side, it seems like you have a heart for, well, what's the core of this and how do we get to that?
I'm a pretty good believer in the adversarial system where our court system kind of depends on lawyers zealously taking one side or the other. So I'm not trying to undermine that. In terms of what happens in court, that's really important because that's how a jury or a judge gets the best information in order to make a decision. But a lot of things don't need to go to court.
Right.
And when you don't need to go to court, there needs to be another way of getting people together to try to make outcomes that are positive some outcomes, not all win-lose. So win-win is possible.
Right.
And so that's what I like. That's what motivates me in that area.
Okay. So it's more for the things that you believe shouldn't go to court. Or, I mean, with these three sisters, they went to court and maybe court wasn't the best.
Yeah, they were appealing. They had just done their first appeal after 5 years of litigation. They were at the Court of Appeals. If they didn't, if they didn't like that outcome, and they had another couple of years maybe to get to the Michigan Supreme Court, they weren't done.
Yeah.
They were still going to be beating each other up.
What ended up happening in that situation?
I don't know. After the appeals, I didn't see how it went.
Well, so that was before you'd started the mediation process. So they didn't ever go through the mediation process. Okay.
Process. It was just a really sad case that I ran across.
Yeah, and that's sad that they never were able to go through the mediation process.
As far as I know, they weren't. Who knows? Maybe later they encountered somebody.
Yeah. So then coming back to Newberg, you were here with George Fox, and you started the
Center for Peace
Learning. And how did the Civility Project come out of that?
Well, that was a long time later. So the Center for Peace Learning was started in 1984. I joined it in 1985. It still exists as the Center for Peace and Justice now. Eventually, I went on to mostly teach other things, and I let go of the Center for Peace Learning leadership in, I think it was 2003.
Okay.
In 2020, COVID had hit, and there was a lot of financial insecurity for the university. They weren't sure if freshmen were just going to massively check out, wait a year. That would have been really hard for the university to handle. So they had to do some preventative cuts. And one of the cuts they made was in the poli-sci program. And I was never a tenured faculty person. I was there for 35 years, but not tenured. And so I was one of the ones that could be released under the contract. So they cut my position in June of 2020. But part of that was there was a settlement package, so we got 1 week's pay for every year we'd worked there. So in July, I went and talked to Robert Baker, the president, and said, "You're paying me for 2/3 of a year work, but not doing anything. There's got to be a better arrangement here."
Yeah.
And we talked for quite a while. And he said, "Well, I am thinking about a project I'd like to see."
Okay.
And that's, I'd like to see us do something on civility in the public discourse. So we talked about that, and in the fall of 2020, we agreed to start the Civility Project, and I would come on as the director of the project on a half-time basis.
Okay.
And that's how the project got started, from basically a concern that Robin Baker at the university had about the environment the university was trying to operate in.
Right, yeah.
So, looking at local politics already at the fall 2020, it was pretty clear that we were divided locally, but this was a reflection probably of what was happening nationally. We've been on track nationally for higher and higher levels of political polarization amongst the populace and then Congress and then all of our political systems. People have been documenting this. Scholars have been studying this for quite a while.
Yeah.
And so, the university sits on the fault lines locally of the division that we experience here. The Quaker Church had gone through a split in 2017. So the Northwest Yearly Meeting, which is a sponsoring group for the university, had split in two. And the Newberg Friends Church here, the largest Friends Church in town, also split, which I was a member of. So the university sits on that fault line in the church. And then, you think about national and even Oregon state politics, all the way up, there's division. And the university sitting in there amidst it. Robin was really concerned that we at the university should have a response for that, to try to help the communities that were being divided overcome that division and regain or build the ability to work together across our differences. So that was the impulse for starting the Civility Project.
Yeah. So that's a big task to take on. To overcome differences. I mean, it sounds like a wonderful thought and idea, but I'm sure the implementation is very complex and nuanced. And so can you share a little bit about what that looks like?
Well, we bite off the pieces we can chew.
Okay.
We've done things on several different lines. We have a series of programs we've had on campus where we have people come in and talk about it. And this is aimed both for students and faculty on campus, but also for people in the community to think about what polarization means to our politics, to our communities, to our churches, the damage it does, how it interferes with good decision-making, how it kind of feeds on itself and makes things worse, and then what would be a different vision. So that visioning, try to get people to think, well, doesn't have to be this way.
Yeah.
There are different ways that we can relate. That's the programs on campus that we've had, I don't know, 8 or 9 or 10. I got to count them up since the fall of 2020 in the last 2 years.
Okay.
Then another aspect of my work is to work in the community where I see opportunity. And that has been a major part of my work this academic year since last fall. I'll talk more about that in detail maybe in a minute, but basically working with folks in mostly the Newburgh area at this point, but a little bit in the larger Oregon area to try to promote, people approaching political differences from a different angle.
Yeah.
And then it's also sort of helping develop the concept of civility, trying to enrich it as a concept to make it clear what the potential is for it. So there's some, I suppose, intellectual work is maybe the word for it, maybe just sort of thinking through that and writing about it, which I've done quite a bit of. And that gets communicated sometimes through our website or a newsletter that I do. There are other things that I've published or I'm in the process of publishing. And so that sort of conceptual work is probably the word I should use to help us get a clear idea of what we mean when we talk about civility.
Yeah. When I think of this, and many of the people who are involved, and you may or may not see this, but it seems like many of the people who get involved are the people who may already have an open mind towards civility and kind of already have that desire, and the rest of, and how many people usually are involved and come to the meetings. And
so it's, we have had a series, and so it's different.
Sure. Okay.
When we had David French here last November 1st, there were like several hundred, 400, 500 at a session that we had on campus with George Foggs. For him, because he's a fairly big name, people heard of him. But for others, we have smaller groups, 30, 60, 80, come to those. For one of the things, this was a sort of a built-in audience. On the 2nd of April, I spoke at the Mayor's Prayer Breakfast here in Newburgh, and there were 150 people there, approximately. So different groups, different sizes of groups. Some of those overlap, but there's a lot of new people in all those. So hundreds and hundreds so far probably have been connected to one or the other thing, one or the other of the things we do. Plus, I've taught 3 classes and had another study group of students who are exposed to some of the civility ideas because of that, and that's totaled 75%.
Okay.
Out of all those.
Yeah, and the reason I ask is because many of these people come and they have the desire to be civil and learn, and then my thought goes to, what about all these people that the people really need it the most are the ones who never seem to show up?
Oh yeah. Well, I grant you that there are some people in politics who seem to gravitate towards the hard-nosed or the bitter, the hostile. Mm-hmm. But my impression is that most people would prefer not to do that.
Yeah.
Politicians I've encountered, I say politicians, I mean, not only people might run for the ones we normally associate, like state legislature or something, but even the local people who run for school boards or city councils or park boards. Mm-hmm. Most of them do not see themselves as being anti-civility. Mm-hmm. I think we can all learn, including myself, learn how to be better at being civil. And I can say more about that. And almost nobody's pro incivility.
Yeah.
So,
well, can you provide a definition when you talk about civility about what that actually does mean to you?
So I think of civility as a three levels, three tiers of civility. The first is sort of what we normally think of civility, which is kindness to one another, treating each other gently, consideration for others. This sees the other person as a person of value and treats them as a person of value, help them get through their day, that kind of thing. That's a basic level of civility, which I think is very important, but not all that civility is. And some people, when they think civility, they think that's all we're talking about. At the second level of it is based on the idea that our differences are not accidental. They're not a flaw. That it's part of our adaptability as a people, as a species, as a community, to have differences of opinions. I mean, we're born with different genetics, unless you're an identical twin, and even if you are, almost immediately you begin to have different life experiences. And as a result, we inevitably have different perspectives on things and we will disagree. And that's adapted for us, it's good for us. It would be terrible if we didn't disagree. So that our disagreements should be generally understood as opportunities or even gifts that allow us as people and as individuals to grow and do better. And if that's the case, that when I find myself having a disagreement with you, then I need to adapt the second level of civility, which is to treat that disagreement as a gift, as an opportunity that you and I need to be stewards of, to take advantage of. So that I need to listen to you and understand how you disagree with me. I need to help you listen to me so you can understand how I disagree with you. And then at that point, we can have an opportunity to share together, to work together, to try to figure out what's the best way to go ahead and meet the concerns that we each bring. Your concerns are not necessarily valid. My concerns are not necessarily valid. They've probably got real roots to them in reality. So I shouldn't, just because I have a great idea, be willing to run roughshod over your concerns. I should be thinking about those. And that if we can both do that, then we can make that opportunity into that disagreement into a real opportunity to make real progress in life.
Wow. So instead of seeing disagreement as almost a fundamental flaw, you actually see it as a gift.
Yeah, it's totally necessary to our survival as a species. The only reason we've been able to advance is we've disagreed. Sometimes I use the example of somebody learning to drive. I don't know about you, but when I'm learning to drive, my parents disagree with me sometimes. And they saved my life and saved who knows how many other lives over the process, because their disagreement was my way of learning how to drive, to help me learn how to drive. That was crucial. Well, that's true of almost anything. If I'm planting something in my front yard and my neighbor doesn't like it, I should find out about that and see why. Maybe it's possible they're just being really picky, but there's also a possibility that I'm not understanding some need of theirs that I would be interfering with my own particular plan. Even though it's my property, I can do what I want. Well, I should just do what I want. I should listen to my neighbors and see what kinds of concerns they have. Because if we all do that, then we can make our neighborhood possibly better. So that's the second level of civility, to say, I don't want to waste this opportunity that this person's bringing me with their disagreement.
Wow, that is such a power. I mean, just that concept of disagreement being a gift. I mean, I'm still just wrapping my head around that and what that could really mean. And maybe it comes down to when we view people as valuable, thoughtful human beings and say, okay, they disagree for a reason. And sometimes people disagree and they're just completely way off base. But I think that we make that assumption probably far too often. And I've just seen kind of in the political environment here, without getting too much into the specifics and details, of each side assuming the other side was just completely insane or just completely clueless. And that's when on social media, often there would be almost these campaigns of just attacking people, attacking their intelligence, attacking their morality, attacking all this stuff and using some pretty harsh names. And they definitely did not see disagreement as a gift. They saw it as a threat.
Yeah.
And I just wonder how, I mean, that's It's just such a powerful concept to turn it from a threat into a gift, and the way we would treat people if we viewed it that way.
Well, I don't want to say that there's no risk in disagreement, because there is. But when you look how pervasive it is and how we're built to disagree, I mean, it just seems to me fundamentally obvious. We are built to disagree. That it must be, well, this is partly because of my faith. I think these are things on purpose. But the effect it historically is also bears this out. It's very useful to us to disagree. So, so if people can keep in mind that possibility, I think it makes them more open to that second level of civility, to listen to each other and cooperate together, try to get on the same side of the table, say, okay, how do we work this out so everybody benefits?
Yeah.
There are, I don't want to get into specifics either, but there are quite a few specific examples from local or national politics where I could say this would really have worked had somebody taken this approach.
Yeah.
But we tend to think very highly of our own group and think the worst of the others. We tend to think that the most egregious example from the other group represents the entire group. And it's very difficult for us to get out of that mindset if we spend our time just talking to people we agree with.
Now, why do you think that is? Why do you think why do you think our perspective as a culture is so ingrained that way?
Well, part of it's sort of natural. It's easier for us to spend life with people we agree with. And so there's a little bit of a natural seeking out of folks we agree with. But part of it has been artificially accelerated in the modern era. And there are a lot of people who have been writing and thinking about this. A guy named Jonathan Haidt, Haidt, just wrote a great article on why the last decade has been so stupid. And basically he's arguing that partly because of the way the social media works, allowing people to anonymously make attacks, and it's easier to find a group that people spread out all over the place with which you agree, and you can kind of get into that group think with that group, starting casting others as evil, and you don't have to spend any time thinking about or interacting with people you don't disagree with it or don't agree with if you don't want to. And then there's some people who've noticed that if they want folks to come back to their website or whatever, that anger and fear are their best motivation. And if they can make you afraid of somebody or angry at somebody, and then they can say, but don't worry, I've got your back, keep coming and listen to me, I can show you how to handle and deal with these threats. Well, you will. You'll keep coming back. Yeah. And they can sort of hook you into a pattern of listening only to them about those issues.
Seems to describe kind of most of the main media channels too.
And to some degree, they all have that temptation.
Yeah, it's true. And I mean, I think that's kind of known that media is about making money, and that's kind of what they do. Whichever side of the coin or whichever channel you're watching, their goal is to keep you watching. And if they can do that by fear or anger, but no, that's just a really powerful concept.
So that gets me to my third level of civility, which is we've been talking now about how the culture of how we interact with each other has gotten more polarized. Public politics, we call that the political culture, how we go about making decisions. And so the third level of civility is tending to the political culture, trying to undermine or counteract those forces that push us into warring camps, and instead encourage folks to listen to one another, to connect with one another, to be willing to do that. And so beyond the individual conflict, I would want to be able to handle my disagreements in a way that builds a better political culture, so that people are more likely to be willing to take the chance of trusting somebody they disagree with and working with them. And that politicians would have more room to do that. If your political base is insisting you never work with the other side, it's very hard to do that. So we need to help political leaders who are willing to listen to other folks and try to make cooperative arrangements. And so that's the third level of, it's a bigger project, but to help tend the political culture.
Yeah. So what would you say your main objective as the Civility Project as a whole? What is the main thing that you'd say you're trying to accomplish? I mean, kind of you just answered it, but kind of specifically that question.
Well, actually, there will be different main things, but one main thing that I'm trying to accomplish right now with help of a lot of others in the Newburgh area is to work in the Newburgh, Dundee, Yamhill County venue where we are right here, to help folks establish connections with people they don't normally agree with, that they don't normally interact with, make those positive connections where they can learn to see each other as people and as valuable partners in resolving problems, and sort of expand that group of people who are wanting to work across lines and would like their leaders to work across political lines. So there's less room for those fostering hostility to operate in our community.
Yeah.
And try to bring as broad of range of folks involved as we can to get involved in that somehow. They don't all have to spend a lot of time at it, but I'd like for people to be aware that this is the case and for them to identify themselves as somebody who would like to build bridges rather than break them down.
Yeah.
So that's a project trying to work on various fronts here and locally. Larger, I think, is one that's more aimed at believers, particularly Christians, like the ones that support George Fox and in the larger church, to help them see themselves as stewards, as I've been mentioning, or of the stewards of the conflict and stewards of the political culture. That's part of our Christian ministry, is to try to help people see each other as gifts. They see their disagreements they bring, their differences they bring as gifts, and then help folks practice and learn how to use those gifts in a cooperative way to resolve conflict and make progress. It seems to me that's a form of peacemaking that it's been hard to put our finger on as a specific form of peacemaking, but that's something I'd like to help develop through what we're trying to develop through the Civility Project.
And maybe a biblical term for that might be unity.
Well, yeah, unity is a good term, and to some degree I agree, but a lot of people use unity to mean uniformity or unison, or all one opinion.
Yeah, which is the opposite kind of what you're saying.
I don't need to be. We don't want to be all of one opinion. We have to, until settled in time when we have reached perfection. We need the differences of opinion in order to keep moving towards what God would want.
Yeah, and for people who are not in the church or not believers, this may be kind of foreign, but in the Bible, there's language that talks about there's kind of this goal of unity among believers. So how do you interpret that, of what that should mean?
So the idea of unity is that we don't cast others as other. Say, you disagree with me, and for you are now my brother. What we want is, hey, you disagree with me, welcome, brother. Let's work this out.
Yeah.
And that would be, we have differences, but we are not enemies. We're not opponents. We're still partners in the work of the church in that case, or the work of the community in a more secular case.
Yeah.
That we are still both full members and welcome as full members of this community. And we need to hear from each other when we make decisions.
Because it seems like when people use the term unity, most people do have in their mind that it means agreement. Yeah. If in order to have unity, we need to all agree on the same thing. And by the way, it's my opinion, not yours. And there's arguments until people are blue in the face, and then churches play, which is why we have 40,000 denominations.
I don't know how many.
Last time I looked, it was somewhere in that range. It's a lot.
Well, 10 years ago, we had several just amongst the Quakers. We had several Quaker meetings which turned into the Newburgh area that were all the same organization. Now they're in at least 3 different organizations. Yeah. So it's and they don't work together like they used to, which is what the real problem. I don't really care so much if there's more than one yearly meeting. Yeah. But if the churches are not working together on projects that they can cooperate on, then that's a loss.
Yeah. So you mentioned before about how George Fox is kind of on the fault lines of this and very much involved just as their position as a Christian university here in town. So what is George Fox's main goal? What would they like to see happen through this? And Robin Baker, like you mentioned.
I'm not sure I know all the inner workings of Robin Baker's mind.
Fair enough.
But what I do know is that he's concerned for the community, but also for the church, for the college's role in the community, in the secular community of Newark and Dundee and Oregon in general. Just because there are things that are happening that are not good, that people are suffering. We're motivated to deal with that in that regard. From the point of the university's own prosperity, it's in a better position if it's not always being in the crossfire between folks that are at extremes of positions.
Fair enough. Yeah.
It would be nice if, from the university point of view, if those are more cooperative. But mostly, we just don't want the communities to cease to function. We had on the 30th of March, or the 9th of March, we had a session involving the Silverton mayor, the Newburgh's mayor, Rick Rogers, our community leader from Canby, and Polly Peterson from Newburgh as a community leader, to talk about what's going on in each of their communities.
Okay.
And I asked them at that session, what do they worry about? What's the worst case scenario? Rick and Polly talked about the possibility that Newburgh and Dundee would be become apartheid, that the progressives would go to these restaurants and the conservatives would go to these restaurants and these other restaurants, and you wouldn't shop at the same stores, or you wouldn't show up at the same community festivals. We would become two separate hostile communities. We're not there, but you could see it going that direction.
Yeah.
The people from Canby and particularly Silverton said, well, that's a concern, but we're also concerned about violence. And the mayor from Silverton told about a demonstration where people were at large in memory of, I think it was George Floyd's killing. Some of the locals thought, this is going to be like a riot, maybe like in Portland, so they pointedly sat out in front of their homes and businesses with weapons, with arms, guns. And the mayor was concerned that something bad would happen, somebody would shoot somebody. If that happened, then you don't know what the next fallout would be. And such things have happened in Portland. So it's not unrealistic. So those are the kinds of ways of dysfunction or suffering in our communities that George Fox would like to help everybody avoid.
Yeah. Well, and I think even with some of those examples, I have talked to both sides, and it's almost shocking to me how much I have realized people kind of want the same thing accomplished, but because one person has taken one stance and one has taken another stance, for example, Black Lives Matter, regardless of what people's opinion with that, everyone agrees that Black Lives Matter. It's just, okay, well, is it that organization or what, and how people have approached it? To me, it's so sad that has become, like, if people were able to sit across the table like you and me and say, okay, what actually is your viewpoint? What is your goal? How would this look? And what is the value of any minority race, or specifically Black lives? And I think they might be shocked at how much they agree when instead there's, when, for example, when someone says all lives matter, there's a lot of connotations with that, and people read things into it, and maybe certain people who say that don't know what the connotation is. So, just things like that, where people agree more than they realize. And I'm not going to get into the weeds completely of all that, but I just see so much misunderstanding where people would really just sit and listen and say, you're actually you disagree, sure, on some things, but you disagree way less than you think you do.
I could give you a real concrete example.
Sure.
In the Newburgh School District last summer, the new majority that got elected last spring, their first day in office, they introduced 3 motions. One was to bar Black Lives Matter, gay pride signs in the classroom, and then there were 2 others on a similar theme. They never actually have discussed the other 2. They've only discussed the one. They first adopted the ban as proposed, and then they adopted a policy to try to be a little more sophisticated about dealing with it.
Mm-hmm.
Though all those conversations were very difficult, lots of anger, lots of hostility. Not one person on that board ever said that it was okay if some kids were not comfortable in the classroom or welcome in the classroom. They all would agree. If you asked, yes, every kid that comes to our district should be safe and welcome in our classrooms.
Mm-hmm.
That was the issue. That was the issue that a lot of people were raising, that some people wouldn't feel safe and welcome, depending on which signs were there, which ones weren't.
Mm-hmm.
They never actually, as a group, said, we agree that all kids should be welcome in classrooms. If they had started there and built out from there to figure out how to make sure some kids weren't being alienated and some kids weren't feeling welcome, I'm pretty sure they could have worked, or they and the faculty working with them could have worked out a positive policy that says, this is the approach we'd like to take to make sure all our kids are welcome in the classroom. But nobody actually said, nobody asked them to all say, are you willing to let any kid be unwelcome in our classroom? Because none of them, I believe, would have said, no, it's fine. They never would have said, no, it's fine if those kids aren't welcome. Yeah. Nobody would have said that. Yeah. So that's an example of where the disagreement wrapped in hostility made it impossible for that group to figure out a way through the process and wasn't just one side power politicking the other side.
Yeah. Well, this is a really good lesson, I think, because we are more or less stuck with there being people with very different views. And how can we move forward and say, what are the things that we agree with, such as making sure that every student feels welcome and valued and that no one is discriminated against? And how can we, with that, move forward and maybe not 100% unanimous make decisions, but how can we go forward with that and decide the best way to do it?
I should say that Rebecca Pyros twice tried to initiate that kind of approach as a board member. So the way I said it before made it sound like nobody was trying to work that way, but Rebecca was, but she couldn't get it going. Yeah. It never got traction.
Yeah. So we're running a bit towards the end of our time here. So one of the things that you may have already touched on, if you feel like this question's been answered, we can go to the next one of what you'd say the long-term vision is for the Civility Project.
We don't know how long the Civility Project's going to run. We've been running it year by year. It'll be one more year for sure. We're going to try to do some planning over this summer, perhaps, to figure out what the potential is for the longer run. I'm going to be 66 this summer, so I'm not going to be doing, at some point I'm going to retire. So it also involves planning for stability and people taking on the project and how we'll arrange for that. The long range, I think, one of the long-range possible goals, this is mine, I can't speak for the university at this point because we haven't discussed it, is to have an ongoing presence on campus where we have some initiatives that are constantly being pushed out into the community to help communities work on conflict, but also things like maybe developing a sort of an understanding or a code of conduct for politicians, and then giving citizens little scorecards they can use to rate their politicians for civility. On a nonpartisan basis, this wouldn't be sponsored by any political party. It would be applied to all the political parties equally, but make politicians aware that their voters, potential voters, are watching them for civility and going to reward, maybe vote a little bit differently because they appreciate one person's civil approach over somebody else's polarizing approach. If we could make politicians know that people are holding them accountable for this, we'll get different behavior.
Yeah. And then what are some of the challenges you've faced starting this project and where you are now? And what are some things that you have done and are doing to overcome those?
I already talked really indirectly about one of the big ones, which is a lot of people distrust civility. They think it's the way that people in power just keep everybody else to be quiet. And I'm not interested in that kind of thing because that, again, we're not taking advantage of the different of our differences when we do that. So to try to have a richer view, a more robust view of civility, say, it's not just being nice. It is being nice, but it's not just being nice. It's still insisting that we work together on our differences to try to find results, and that we pay attention to how the whole political culture is working and whether we are despoiling it or it's strengthening it. And so I think that's one of the big sort of conceptual challenges that we're working on. And we'll have to keep working on because there's still people that haven't heard that we're doing a different version of civility than they're used to.
Yeah. Well, even my understanding, I mean, the thing that is really sticking out to me, like you've said, to that second tier of recognizing disagreement as a gift, I think that is a message. Even that concept is so foreign to people. I think that could really benefit a lot of people to even consider disagreement as a gift.
So if people want to hear a nice 10-minute concise version of that, the Mayor's Prayer Breakfast, I spoke with that theme. The Mayor's Prayer Breakfast is on video. It's about an hour, maybe 90 minutes long. I only spoke for 10 minutes. 11. They gave me 10, but I think I took 11.
Okay, I'll get a link to that for you, and I'll put it in the description for this episode.
Sure. If people are interested in the Civility Project, they can write to me at civility@georgefox.edu, and I'll put them on our mailing list. I do a newsletter periodically.
Okay.
So that helps them keep up with what we're doing.
And what are some other ways that people in the community can get involved?
So we are there's a group of us planning a community event probably for June 18th. It's a Saturday. It's the day before Father's Day, where we're going to, the goal is to kick off a new level of community involvement in the Newburgh-Dundee area. People who are interested in that in working in Newburgh and Dundee, should contact me at that civility@georgefox.edu.
Okay.
And we'll plug them into that project and the spin-offs. We're hoping for a lot of spin-off projects from the different things that people might be interested in. Maybe something related to art, maybe something related to conversation. Who knows? We've got different ideas, cooperative projects, that kind of thing.
Okay.
And so look for those opportunities. And when you hear about them, come to the events or at least let us know. Let me know that you're interested, and we'll try to plug you in.
Okay. Well, thank you, Ron, for your time and for sharing all that you shared and for doing what you're doing. This is obviously a much needed thing, and I look forward to getting the word out about civility in all of its different forms.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode, and I hope you learned a lot. More importantly, I hope you put these concepts into practice and share this episode with your friends, family, and maybe even someone you disagree with. You can check out more information on the Civility Project website, which I've linked in the description. There is also a great video of Ron sharing more specifically about the gift of disagreement, and you can check that out in the description as well, which I've linked and given the timestamp for that. If you enjoyed today's episode, please hit the subscribe button to make sure you get each episode as it comes out. Also, if you support the mission of the Giving Town, please leave a 5-star rating. That helps people know how wonderful this podcast really is. Again, this podcast is sponsored by my real estate team, the Joyful Roberts Group. So if you're thinking of selling your home, give me a call. Well, thank you guys for tuning in, and I will talk to you next time.